Ryan here with E39 Source. Today we're going to tackle transmission mounts. I did a video a couple weeks or a couple months ago about engine mounts. I had a couple requests to do the transmission mounts too, so that's what today will be. Ignore the fact that the front wheels are off and the fender liners are out. It makes no difference. I'm just working on other projects up there. We'll start by showing where the transmission mounts are. They're right here on the back, the far end and the bottom of the transmission. They're held on the top with what appears to be a 13mm nut, and then the other end of the transmission mounts, there's a stud coming at the bottom too, and that goes through your transmission brace, which is a cross member right here that supports the back of the transmission, and that brace is held onto the chassis with 3 13 or 16mm nuts or bolts on each side. So certainly a lot less involved and a lot easier to do than the engine mounts, but I'm going to get this car up in the air. I've got a lift. If you don't have a lift, you can make it work with jack stands too. You'll just have a little bit less room. Here's our part number. That's 22316771221. You will need 2 of them. You can see it works on pretty much all the E39 models there, and these are super cheap from Cortico or Corteco, $5.60 a piece, and you just need 2 of them. If you want to buy the genuine BMW, you're going to get the same part, and you'll pay about 5 times as much. They come in a box that looks like this. It's got some more probably Cortico specific part numbers, and then the mount itself looks like that. It's not completely symmetrical. The one end has a longer stud, and then it also has a little nipple in it there, and that is to ensure that it's installed not only the right direction, but in the right placement, and I'll show you that in a few moments under the car. I lied. It's a lot easier to show those nipples and the placement on the transmission right here, since I have a transmission out of the car, and we can actually get a look at the top end of it. So see how the top of the transmission there, where the nut is, has a little notch right there, and the nipple fits in the notch pointed towards the back. So that dictates proper installation. Now it's just a matter of spinning off the nuts that hold it on to the bottom, which if we come under the car, find the transmission brace that I talked about before, and then look over here, there's your 13mm nut that holds it on the bottom. There's the other side, and then we're going to need some sort of a trick wrench or a little spanner or a tiny socket or something to counterhold that top nut, or remove rather those top nuts as well. We're also going to make use of a safety stand, because obviously when we remove those mounts we need a way to support the back of the transmission, the drive shaft, otherwise it's going to fall down on us. We don't want that. It won't fall out of the car because the mount is still here, but we'll need a way to kind of lift the transmission up about 1 inch. I'm going to use a Harbor Freight safety stand for that, and I'll show you in a moment. If you're not using a large automotive lift for this job, say you're doing it in the garage, jack and jack stands, you'll just need another jack or jack stand or bottle jack, whatever you've got, to support the transmission since we're taking the mounts off. Now on the lift I'm going to use this Harbor Freight 2-ton safety stand, which I have adjusted up 2 pegs, and then we're going to lift right here in front of this exhaust hanging brace and the rear transmission support brace. Use a block of wood or a thick towel or something. Obviously don't use your drain bolt as a jacking point. Make sure you're not touching that. And then what I've done is just get it nice and tight, just where you can start to see it move up. So that means we're no longer supporting the transmission on the mounts. I've already removed the lower nuts. I'm going to figure out what socket or ratchet is going to work up in there to remove the top nuts. Okay, here's the setup that works best. This is an open-ended wrench on one side and a ratcheting 13mm box on the other end, and this one has a cool little wobble to it that can be locked in place with this black lever. And I didn't use too much of the wobble, but the ratcheting part saved me a ton of time on both upper nuts, and the upper nuts are different than the lower nuts. They have a large separate flange on the bottom. The flange is attached, but the nuts spin independently from the flange. So that's what the top nuts look like. And then the passenger side, the right side, as we stand down here looking towards the front of the car, has this little bracket in between the top of the transmission mount and the nut. The bracket made it impossible to fit the tool on there, so what I did was flip it around and use the open-ended side of the wrench, get it loose a couple turns, and then depending on how much or little corrosion is on the underside of your car, you might just be able to spin it off by hand, and that was the case on this car, which has been actually a Maryland car for the majority of its life, pretty much all of its life. So the top nuts are out. What I'm going to do right now is just raise up the transmission about 1 inch and then fish those things out of there. What you'll find next is that with the transmission pushed up as far as it can go, don't cram it up there. There's a shifter carrier and other components on top you don't want to damage. But once the transmission is all the way up, you can get them out because the old ones are flat. and warped from being in there for so long. We can see these aren't even as bad as I've seen. The old one there on the left and the new one on the right. But the new ones are a little bit taller. So putting them in will require dropping the brace a little bit, and that's no big deal. You can get to 2 of the 13 millimeters with an impact gun or normal sockets. The third one, assuming your exhaust is still in place, is right there and requires a little bit of trickery to loosen that one up. And it's the same deal over here on the driver's side. So the wrench I found success with is that one. And what we're going to do is just loosen those up, same as the other nuts. Once you get them loose enough, you can just unthread them by hand a little bit, and then that's going to allow us to lower the transmission brace here and put the new mounts in. Lowering the bracket a hair is definitely the key to easing installation of these transmission mounts. As far as putting them in between the transmission and the brace, I found it easiest to use the tall stud on top to kind of seat that in the groove on the transmission, and then push the bottom stud up over the mount, and then just look in the bottom and feel around for it, and then push the lower thread, the threaded stud, through the hole that it goes in. Then the only other thing that you've got to line up is the nipples on top so they sit in that gap on the transmission. Then you can lower the transmission, tighten the brace down again, thread the top nuts on by hand, and tighten them down with a wrench. I don't have torque specs for this, but you know, snug, tight. Don't go crazy with the impact gun, but make sure they're more than finger tight as well. And that's new mounts. And then the bracket, obviously don't forget your bracket. That goes in between the mount and the nut, and then snake your wiring harness back in the bracket, and we're done. And if I didn't mention before, accessing the 3 bolts that hold up the transmission brace, 2 of them are kind of covered by this heat shielding. Just reach in there and pry the heat shielding out of the way. It's just a little piece of aluminum. It's very flexible. It'll bend all day, and then when you're done, just push it back into place. And additionally, I already had the transmission pan off this car, the plastic shield that covers the transmission. If you still have yours, it looks like that. It's just a series of 1/4 turn Phillips head screws, 1, 2, and then a couple more. I think there's 4 more up in the front. Release those, and that'll come out of the way and give you access to this whole space. So I'm going to move the stand out of here now, record the mileage, put it in the service history, and we're all set. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As usual, stay tuned. If you have any comments, questions, leave them down below, or an email to ryan@e39source.com. We'll talk in the next source video. Take care.